We all get infections, whether it's viral, bacterial, fungal. And the nature of how we were created is that we have an arsenal of an immune system that recognizes these as foreign. And as it does this, it identifies them and makes ultimately antibodies to attack and destroy these foreign invaders. But in some patients, and we'll talk a little bit more about maybe some of the genetic susceptibility, is that these antibodies that those patients make actually end up cross-reacting with neurologic receptors. And we call that molecular mimicry, and hence the name of the company, Molecular Labs, is because if you think about the protein alphabet, there's only 24 letters in the protein alphabet. And so organisms like bacteria and viruses and other proteinaceous infectious diseases, they also have to use the same 24 letters of the alphabet. And at some point, there's some homology between those letters in their alphabet and our letters in our alphabet. Now, the immune system is trained through its surveillance system to not let those cells, T cells, B cells, be created and let out. But in some patients, those B cells and T cells and plasma cells get allowed and get let out. And once they're out there, they're called memory B cells, and they continue to produce antibodies. Well, in these patients, what happens is these particular antibodies cross-react with different neurologic receptors in the brain and in the CNS, and sometimes we call this friendly fire. And if you think about the wartime, where we accidentally maybe target our own troops because we couldn't tell the difference between the enemy troops and our troops, but one of the strongest systems in our body, which is the immune system, begins to direct attacks against us. And in reality, this is not an uncommon situation. If you think about, this happens and they began to attack our joints, we call it rheumatoid arthritis. If it attacks our pancreas, sometimes we call it diabetes type 1. If it attacks our thyroid, we call it Hashimoto's. But what about if it attacks the brain or parts of the central nervous system? Do we call this mental disorders? Do we call it rebellious kids? Do we call it bad parenting? What do we call it? And what are those things that actually occur in order to be able to identify and understand that? And so what does happen, unfortunately, is these different types of syndromes and different types of symptoms occur. And in doing that, many of the standard therapies is then to treat it as a anxiety, psychiatric, neuropsychiatric disorder. And those are very helpful because there's over 60 million people in the US who are on some form of antipsychotic, psychotropic, anti-anxiety, antidepressive. And so these are very effective. But in patients whose etiology is an immune dysfunction, these are not.